ready to be encouraged and equipped for the authentic life of victory God has prepared for you. Welcome to Real Victory Radio with your hosts, Elaine Martinez and Latan Roland Murphy. Two friends, both devoted wives and moms who have a passion for Jesus and huge hearts for the broken. Elaine is an inspirational speaker, author, and Bible teacher. Latan is an award-winning author, sought-after speaker, and Bible teacher, too. Get ready for some real talk about real life and answers to how you can be courageous and live in victory. Now here's your hosts, Elaine and Latan.
It's a noisy world out there. We all need to find quiet spaces and places to escape it all. And on today's show, we are going to help you find just that place. Hey friends, welcome to Real Victory Radio. I'm your host, Elaine Martinez. Latan is not with us today, but we have a very special guest, and I can't wait to introduce you to him. And I'm so glad that you have joined us for today's show, because I know that it is going to help you really get quiet in this crazy, busy, chaotic, noisy world out there. We've had some great shows lately. You can check them all out. All of our previous episodes are available on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a thing. And friends, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at gocourageously@realvictoryradio.org. We are listener supported, so please check out the Victory Movement over on our website and help us keep Real Victory Radio on the air in 2020 and beyond. You can find out more at realvictoryradio.org. Today's special guest is a dear friend of my co-host Latan's, and I'm excited to introduce you to author Martin Wiles. Martin is from Greenwood, South Carolina, and he and his wife, Michelle, are the founders of Love Lines from God. You can connect with them at lovelinesfromgod.com. He is an author, English teacher, minister, and freelance editor. He serves as managing editor for Christian Devotions and as a proof editor for Courier Publishing, and he has written a book called A Whisper in the Woods, Quiet Escapes in a Noisy World. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Hello. Thank you, Amy.
We're so glad to have you on Real Victory Radio today, and we're going to be talking about your book, A Whisper in the Woods, Quiet Escapes in a Noisy World. I love that title. I know Latan wishes she could be here with us today. She wanted me to make sure to mention to the listeners and to you that she bought this book for all of the men in her life, as well as some friends, and they are enjoying it now, and it's a great gift book. For the first question I want to talk to you about is how loud it is out in our world and how that affects us, and I want to go into that a little bit deeper in a moment, but could you first tell us a little bit about the title and how you came to be writing on this particular subject?
Well, I did not grow up hiking or camping. I did grow up hunting and fishing with my dad, but later on, after I'd already got out on my own, got married, had kids, my brother and I decided that we wanted to start camping and hiking and backpacking. And so I write a devotion 5 days a week, and I just went through all those that I had that related to camping and hiking and put all those together and sent them to a publisher and said, hey, what do you think about this? And I didn't have a title. Well, I did have a title, but and I don't remember what it was, but he wasn't impressed with the title. And so in February of last year, I attended the Asheville Christian Writers Conference, which I've been doing for a number of years, and Latan is always there. And so I said to her, I've got a publisher interested in these devotions, but I need a good title. And this was the one she came up with. And so I offered that to him, and he was really excited about it, liked it, and that's how we came up with the title.
I love it. through these hiking and camping experiences, God taught you some valuable lessons, and you have seen you through some really difficult life experiences. I know that our world is really noisy, and that can mean the actual noise or just the noise that plays out in our mind. It sounds to me like you have found this place of quiet escape, and you are sharing this through this book. It really is a noisy place. It's doom and gloom. You know, we have personal crisis and the commotion that is around us every day. But how does this noisy world affect us, and what can we do about it?
Well, I'm fixing Amy to later this year hit where I have lived my 6th decade in life. And just thinking back as to how it was when I was a boy and comparing it to now, it's the noise level has increased. And while I love technology, use it every day, I think that has increased the noise level. And I think one of the unfortunate things about that is that we're not able to hear God clearly in the midst of all the noise. And so not so much camping in a campground, but particularly hiking and backpacking, where I found out when my brother and I started doing that these were experiences that took me away from all the sounds. And we didn't hear cars, and we didn't hear trucks, and very seldom heard an airplane. And we didn't hear a TV or a radio or any of the things that cause noise. And I found that in those experiences, it was just so much easier for me to hear God. And so, you know, over the years, we hiked through the Appalachian Mountains in Georgia and South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and I did more than that than he did, and my daughter hiked with us sometime, and she and I did some that he didn't do, but we found places, you know, that you couldn't see from a road, but that you had to get off the beaten path to go see. And so they were quiet. And, you know, to answer your question, I think in a nutshell, the noise that's all around us, whether it be outward or, as you mentioned, whether it be inward noise of a different type, just creates static in our life and keeps us from hearing God. I don't know how many of our listeners remember the time, and some may still experience before we had satellite radio, when once you got so far from the station, you began to hear static, or if you went under a bridge, you heard static, and eventually probably another radio station would cut in on the one you were listening to. And so I think noise is kind of like that static, and it keeps us from hearing God. And so I, you know, through these devotions and just personally, I try to get away from that. I teach 103 middle schoolers every day. And when I come home, I have 2 grandkids waiting that my wife keeps, plus another little toddler, and she never understands why I want complete silence. But I do. I want complete silence. The only thing I want to hear is our old antique clock on the dresser ticking. And so the way I find silence is to get up at 4:30 every morning, and that's when I write. And, you know, that's when I spend time with God. And I just think that, you know, we have to find this silence in order to be able to hear God clearly. And you know, Jesus had to do that in a time that was much less noisy than what we live in now. And I think if he thought that was important, that we ought to as well.
That is the truth. And I can completely understand why you would need complete silence after being with that many middle schoolers every day. That is quite a job. I substituted quite a bit when my kids were growing up. And it is. You want to come home and get quiet. And I love how you pointed out that if Jesus needed silence and to get away and to be quiet, in a day when he didn't have all of the distractions and the noise that we have in our world today. How much more so do we need it today? So that was a great point. I know it sounds to me like you have found some victory in this place over the noise and the chaos of the world. And I want to ask you one question that every guest on this show gets to answer. Where in your life have you experienced, or are you currently experiencing, the most victory?
It's probably now, and I have to give you a little background because I heard a lot of noise that kept me from experiencing that victory for a number of years. My father was a pastor, so I grew up as a PK, preacher's kid, and was always in church. And at a middle school age, ironically, around 12, I knew that God wanted me to preach, but I also knew that he wanted me to teach. And I didn't know how that was going to work out, but I knew that's what he wanted me to do, and that's what I was supposed to do in life. Well, a PK's life is not really that easy. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of moving around most of the time. It's a lot of kids and adults expecting you to be perfect and be a little angel. And that was okay for a while. But then when I hit about 14, I didn't want to do that anymore. And so that's kind of when the adolescent rebellion started, around 14. And it kept going until I was, at various levels. Sometimes I was better than others, but I was, just involved in a lot of stuff that I shouldn't have been involved in. And it wasn't until I was in my close to my mid-20s that I kind of got back to this. And so during those years, I heard a lot of noise, and it wasn't good noise. It was bad noise, from peers and Satan leading me in wrong directions. And so when I, was around mid-20s, I knew that I was tired of running from God, and I knew I needed to get back on track. So that's actually when I went to college, studied for the ministry and all that. But the third piece of it, the writing, did not come until 2009, many years later, and that's the year that my dad died. And he was not a writer. The only thing that I ever knew that he wrote was sermons, and he hand wrote every sermon that he ever preached. And somehow that's when I felt God's calling to write. So now I had a third piece in there to preach and to teach and to write, and I had no idea how God was going to put all that together, because of those years of rebellion, I had some things, that I had done, and sin always have consequences. So there were some, things that God was going to have to work out if all that was going to come together, which he did. So, now I'm preaching bivocationally, which is fine because I teach full time, and that's really what I always wanted to do. I have preached full time before, but really I felt God leading me to teach full time, so that's what I do, and I preach bivocationally. And then, the writing stuff just kind of came over a period of time after many, many rejections, and, then it's just kind of built into positions of being editor of several places. And so the victory was found in just doing what God called me to do, but it took me a lot of years to get to this point.
I love how you said the victory was found in doing what God called you to do. So many times we run from him, or we try to hide. Like I read one of your devotionals recently, trying to hide from God. And he is faithful to come and look for us and find us. When we turn and seek him, he will be found, it says in Jeremiah. And there is victory in doing what he called us to do, because that is where the abundance in our life is found, when we're stepping into doing what he's called us to do, because that's where our sweet spot is, and that is where he is going to just come alive in us so that we can overflow and do the things that he's called us to do, to preach and teach and write in your case. And it sounds like you really have stepped into that place of victory. So thank you so much for sharing that part of your story. I love asking that question because I never know where that question is going to lead in the interview, but it always people share a powerful place that they have found God and found victory. So thank you for sharing that with us. I want to talk a little bit about one of the devotionals in your book, and this was called Bring on the Rain. We don't always want to walk through storms, but the Bible tells us that we absolutely will. And he tells us in James 1:2, it says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy." And part of me just wants to scream out, what in the world? How can we find joy in the troubles or the storms that come our way? It's hard to believe that we can do that. But will you help us to better understand how we can find joy in the storms of life, and tell us a little bit more about the story behind this devotional?
Okay. Well, the title obviously is a play on literal rain, as well as you mentioned, a reference to the Bible verse where rain comes in the form of trials in our life. And this one came out of a camping experience that my wife and I, two friends, and our daughter's two boys, we had them along with us. And I thought about Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's quote when he says, "Into each life some rain must fall." And so we chose this little campsite. It was not our first time there, but I think it was only our second time there. The name of the place was real interesting. It's called Lazy J, and it was up in the mountains of North Carolina. And so we got there one day. It was calling for thunderstorms later in the day, but we had called ahead and said, "Hey, can we check in before 2 p.m., which was the normal check-in time?" And the camp host said, "Well, it's, hadn't been anybody there the night before, so you just come anytime." So knowing this time of the year and how thunderstorms pop up, we said, we're going to go get up there around, in the morning, get set up before noon, because that's usually in the mountains when thunderstorms start popping up. So we got there, and the weather was sunny and cool, gorgeous for about an hour. And about the time we erected the tent and I put up a tarp outside, the first gully washer marched in. I am so Southern, and I hope your listeners will understand some of the terminology I use. But my wife headed for the tent. Grandkids were inside, and I stood outside on the tarp wondering what in the world I was going to do. We had put the tent close to the electrical box outlet, and what we didn't realize at the time is that bare spot was the low spot in the campsite. So as the water ran down, it puddled several inches deep outside the tent. And as I stood out there trying to stay dry, I heard my wife say, "We have a problem." And I didn't have to ask what it was. I knew what it was. Water was running inside, did not have a shovel. And so I used the next best thing I had, which was the claw on a hammer. And I trenched in front of the tent to move the water away from the tent. Then I took a broom and swept away the excess. And, after that, we tried to prepare the tent so in case this happened again. And a long time ago, when I first started hiking and backpacking, I had an older guy who'd been doing it longer than I had say this to me, that among hikers, one of the quotes is, "Rain is not a deterrent, it's just an inconvenience." And so I, in that devotion, applied that to the trials that we face in life, because quite honestly, a lot of the trials that I have faced in my lifetime have been self-inflicted. And there was a time when I didn't really want to share that with anybody because that means being vulnerable. But when I started writing for Christian devotions, the executive editor now, Cindy Sproles, told me even way back then, she said, Martin, you're going to have to open up and share. People want to hear that. And so that's what, I started doing. And so that meant sharing a lot of my trials in life that were self-inflicted because I had made bad decisions. And, sometimes it's not anything we've done. Sometimes it's a decision somebody else has made. Sometimes it's something that God sends because he wants to teach us a lesson or grow us spiritually. But coming to the place where we can say, bring on the rain of the trials, that's another point altogether. And so now, at this stage in my life, I'm trying to get to the place where I'm telling God, bring on the rain. If it's going to put me where you want me, if it's going to, bring victory in my life, then, send them my way. And, when we look at it that way, it helps us to see the troubles we have with a different perspective. And at the same time, we know that the only way we're going to endure that and learn from it is through God's strength and the wisdom he gives us.
There is so much in that. I loved how you said the gully washers. And sometimes life really does feel like a gully washer. It's just the trials come and they won't stop and we don't know what to do. But we can, like you said, rely on God's strength. Martin, we have just a few moments left in the show, and I think this is a great place for us to stop and pray for the listeners that as they have these loud, noisy gully washers coming into their lives, that they would be able to find the quiet places with God and to really rely on his strength. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and for just being with us today. Would you like to start our prayer time? We have just about maybe 3.5 minutes left.
I will.
Thank you.
Father, we thank you for this time we've had together. Thank you for this ministry and for the lives that are being touched by it. Father, it's very difficult for us to endure the trials of life. And yet we know that through those trials that you teach us so many lessons. And I just want to pray for the listeners because I know that they're going through various things that we don't even know about. And if they're not going through them now, the chances are that they will at some point in the future. And Father, I just pray that you would let them know that whatever they're facing now or will face in the future, that you are their rock and their refuge, that when the gully washers come and seek to destroy them and drown them, that you, like you did with Peter many years ago, are always willing to reach down and draw them up, put them in a place of safety. Remind us when the trials come that you are our source of strength and wisdom and refuge. And Father, we just thank you for your love and we thank you for your grace and your mercy. And we just pray that you continue to bless this radio ministry and use it to touch lives all over the world. We pray that you would just bless the listeners. And we know that you want to be involved in every detail of our lives and that you know the details. So you know all that's going on in their lives. And we just pray for physical healing if that's needed, emotional healing, spiritual healing, that you would just do a great work and that your name would be honored and glorified through it all. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Oh, amen. That was beautiful prayer. I can't even add anything to that. The devotional we talked about today ended with a prayer that said, Father, thank you for sustaining us through the trials of life. And Martin, you have ministered to even me today as I am facing trials in my life that I can trust in him. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Next week, Latan and I will be back talking about the Word in us and John 1. So come back next week and listen in. Thanks for making Real Victory Radio a part of your day. Remember, you can learn more at realvictoryradio.org. Go out today, go courageously, and live victoriously. Thanks so much for making Real Victory Radio part of your day.
We hope you were encouraged by today's episode of Real Victory Radio with Amy Elaine Martinez and Latan Roland Murphy. Go to amyelaine.com to find out more about Amy's ministry, including her book, Becoming a Victory Girl. And go to latanmurphy.com to learn more about her award-winning book, Courageous Women of the Bible. Real Victory Radio is a listener-supported radio ministry outreach. We depend on your prayers and donations. Check out the Victory Movement for ways you can partner with us to reach listeners with the power to go courageously and live in victory. Please join us again Saturdays at 6 a.m. and 4 p.m. for Real Victory Radio.